What do you know about Chinese video games and its industry? Chances are, not much. Most of you won't even name any Chinese games except Black Myth Wukong or Genshin Impact. However, China's impact on gaming is way bigger than you would imagine. It's home for over 600 million players, which is almost half of the country, and it covers 25% of gaming's global revenue. I've done research, and I'll tell you why there are so few Chinese games that we know about, why your favorite games are probably related to China, and why one of the biggest shifts in the industry might be already happening now. To understand the Chinese market, we need a quick recap of the Chinese history of video games. Their first steps began in the 1980s, with Japanese consoles and arcade games. An important point here is that China was one of the first countries ever to be against video games. The reason is fear of video game addiction. A lot of Chinese players used to spend a significant amount of time playing games. Some were averaging more than 40 hours a week. Due to this, the government was constantly battling the industry. This meant high import fees for consoles, so companies like Nintendo preferred to stay away. This formed a huge market for piracy. Copycat consoles were made by local Chinese producers, and some were imported illegally. China never had strict copyright laws, so some of them were literally selling in shopping malls. By the end of the 90s, roughly 60% of households had some sort of a console. This led up to one of the craziest restrictions ever. China had banned all import and production of consoles in the year 2000, which lasted up until 2015. This meant no PlayStation, no Xbox, or anything really, for 15 years, except for two platforms, PC and mobile. Due to this ban, PC gaming thrived through internet cafes as there were no hard regulations for them. Since people were so used to piracy, from fake consoles to games, the Chinese market had developed a unique side. The developers had to focus on the free-to-play and subscription-based models to make cash. It's safe to say that basically 99% of all Chinese video games were following one of those models. MMORPGs were the standard genre. Thousands were created, often copying each other and being filled with pay-to-win monetization. This trend later followed into mobile games as well, which ended up being the main income source for the industry. Thanks to this, tech giants like Tencent managed to make crazy amounts of cash, but we will talk about them later. Western devs like Valve and Blizzard also follow their models with games like Dota 2 and World of Warcraft, as well as Clash of Clans and Candy Crush. But why exactly Chinese games are only popular in their own country? How come we know nothing about their biggest MMORPGs? The reason is quite simple actually. Chinese developers never aimed at global reach, and the majority of their games had the goal of squeezing as much money as possible from the locals. This meant quickly produced low-quality games and aggressive monetization. It worked wonderfully in China, which was already a huge market, so there weren't many reasons for them to go global. And for Western players, not many wanted to dive deep into the Chinese slop anyway, even if it was accessible. Besides this, China was also heavily isolated from foreign games. The piracy issues meant that it was practically impossible to sell games there for foreign publishers, so they never went there. Games like Dota 2, that followed the Chinese free-to-play trends, actually managed to get some traction, but they could never compete with games that were produced by China for China. All of this brings us to a very important part of Chinese video games: censorship and anti-addiction measures. We've already talked about the latter a bit, but in 2007 it got way more serious. China had added the infamous regulations for teenagers, now demanding personal IDs to play online games. Besides that, they've also added playtime trackers. Their goal was to incorporate a playtime limit, after which the player would be punished. Back in 2007, that limit was just 3 hours per day. If you went over it, games would literally take away your in-game currencies like gold or XP. That might seem harsh, but it's nothing compared to what China has today. If you're a teenager in China as of 2025 and you wanna play, you can do so only on the weekends for 1 hour per day, only from 8 PM to 9 PM. And if you fail to comply, well, you have no other option but to comply. If in 2007 they would take away your gold, now you can't break the rule at all. The game just forcefully disconnects you. As you can understand, China isn't very happy with its teenagers playing video games, but besides that, they're also really hard on the developers or whoever's trying to put out some games on their market. In 2018, China had invented their own licensing system for video games. Now, to publish a game, you had to get approved by NPPA. That is not an easy task by by any means. For example, in 2025, there were around 19,000 games published on Steam. In China, however, only 1,500 games were approved, and only 100 of them were foreign. Besides that, 2018 and 2021 saw two massive freezes, when no games whatsoever could get approved. So what does NPPA check games for? If you want to get a license for publishing, your game should have alignment with Chinese ideology, original game design, so no copycats no more, and high production quality. Before you make any assumptions, no, it doesn't mean your game has to promote communism or something. Their main requirement is for the game to be positive, as in good guy is always winning. But of course there is some political censorship as well. For example, Battlefield 4 was banned in the country for depicting China as an enemy and exploding a skyscraper in virtual Shanghai. The main issue with NPPA is that you can't really predict their opinions if you're a developer. While most of the rules may seem easy to follow, there are also hidden ones that you'd have to figure out on your own. For example, a lot of hidden rules are related to Chinese mythology, stuff like skeletons, spirits and ghosts. You generally can't have that in your game, but the rulebook doesn't say what exactly you should avoid. And those rules can change over time without any disclosure. But even if you manage to do everything right, you can still get rejected, just because the monthly quota for NPPA approvals has already been reached. So that was an outline of the Chinese domestic market. Lots of issues for both the players and developers throughout many years. But there is an important takeaway here though. Many surveys had shown that despite all of the chaos, Chinese developers still preferred to focus on China as the main market, with no belief in going global. We've talked on the reasons for it. Western gamers were always skeptical of Chinese video games, and it was justified. Most of their games were simply copycats and cash cows, sometimes with no localization or even easy access, so it was kind of a paradox. Devs don't make good global games because no one appreciates them, and at the same time, no one appreciates them because no devs make good global games. And it went on like that for many years. However, there was one dark horse from China that decided to try and challenge this, that being MiHoYo, the developers of Genshin Impact, the first high-quality, aimed for global reach Chinese game ever. The reasons to make it were quite simple. The Chinese market was becoming too crazy with the restrictions, the competition there was higher than ever, and besides, they've already had some success overseas with their mobile game Honkai Impact III. So they went for it and made Genshin Impact, a classic Chinese gacha RPG, but fully localized and globally accessible on day one. The thing is, it really couldn't go bad for them as long as they've actually tried. While there was no solid proof for it before, China was #1 in making and operating such games. No one can monetize as well as them, no one can achieve such good cross-platforming, and no one can operate a live service RPG that smoothly, especially if we're talking about such high quality of content like in Genshin Impact. The experiment was a huge success. In fact, half of the revenue for the game comes from overseas players. It showed that China can be great at making games when it actually tries, and it can still bring a lot of cash. For many of us, Western players, this was the first Chinese game we've seen, and it was generally a good first impression. This showed the developers a new gateway, an unexplored path of success in the industry. The next big thing to come through it was Black Myth Wukong. It also was a former mobile game developer, this time for the Chinese market exclusively, and once again, due to high competition and restriction chaos, they decided to go for global reach. With Black Myth, however, it's a completely different story. While you can call Genshin Impact a game with AAA quality, it's not a AAA game by definition. It was free to play and live service, while most consider a true AAA to be a paid single-player experience with the highest production quality possible. Genshin Impact wasn't a bad game by any means, but it was a Chinese classic, free-to-play gacha, the thing that China was known for. Black Myth Wukong took on a much more important challenge for the industry. Once again, with all the piracy issues, paid games were unheard of in China, let alone single-player. It was something a Chinese developer would never touch before. For that reason, Black Myth Wukong is considered to be a more important game for China, especially with the reception it got. If Genshin Impact showed the new gateway, Black Myth Wukong kicked it open. There is a lot of confidence for the global market and huge AAA projects. In fact, we already have games like Wu-Chang, Where Winds Meet, or even the more important Blood Message by NetEase. This is one of the biggest companies in China alongside Tencent, and Blood Message is their very first AAA title. They are consistently placed in the top 3 for mobile game revenue globally, running dozens of free-to-play games. But now even they want to try this new market and niche, which says a lot about the Chinese sentiment towards global gaming. Even the government is starting to help the developers, seeing this as a way to share their culture with the world. They can hate video games as much as they want, but you can't ignore an industry with such huge potential. While I've been saying that China was isolated from the global market, that was actually kind of a lie. Yes, China never exported their games, nor did they get many Western games themselves. But if you're talking about influence on the global gaming market, China would actually be at the top. The reason for it is Tencent, and the way they spend their cash earned from Chinese mobile games. Since the 2000s, they've invested huge amounts of money in dozens of Western companies. And if you think those investments aren't a big deal, like it's just a small percentage of some little-known companies, you'd be dead wrong. How about owning 100% of Riot Games, 84% of Supercell, minority stakes in Larian Studios, Paradox Interactive, Ubisoft, and most importantly, 40% of Epic Games. While all the listed companies are obviously significant, I wanna focus on Epic Games. 40% does sound bleak compared to 100%, but it still means huge influence on the decision making of the company. How about this? Tencent is arguably the reason why Fortnite Battle Royale exists. In case you didn't know, initially Fortnite was a paid co-op game with zombies, and the Battle Royale mode could have went the same pay-to-play model. Tencent, however, advised Epic to make it free-to-play and operate it as a live service game, which they followed. After all, Tencent was already running games like League of Legends with great success and had some valuable insights. I think I don't need to elaborate what happened to Fortnite after this. They've also played a major role in converting Unreal Engine, arguably the most important game engine at the moment, into a free-to-use model. Before that, it was subscription-based. Thanks to Tencent's $300 million, Epic Games could afford the change. This opened a gateway for thousands of developers, big and small, to make high-fidelity games. One of those developers was Game Science, the team behind Black Myth Wukong. Another business that Tencent is running is publishing Western games in China. For example, you are a developer and you want your game to be sold in China. It's a big market after all. However, you obviously can't do it due to the NPPA licensing and an insane amount of rules that you could never fully understand. The solution is simple. You go to Tencent, or sometimes Tencent approaches you. You make a deal, often featuring you selling part of your company to them. In exchange, they prepare your games for China and publish it there. PUBG is probably the biggest example I can give you of this. Interestingly, besides just publishing your game, they help with a lot of other stuff too. PUBG Mobile was basically their idea, and it was them who developed it. Who else could make the top 2 mobile game by revenue if not Tencent, right? In general, Tencent is an investor that everyone wants. They get a share of your company, but they don't interfere with the creative process that much. They can give advice and lead the way if needed, but overall, they are a quiet supporter. As you can see, Tencent has always had a huge influence on the global video game industry, and it's much more than just making hit AAA games. They're basically the ones who dictate how games are made by others. Owning Epic Games and Riot Games means partially influencing the Unreal Engine and being a trendsetter in live service games, as most developers look upon Fortnite, League of Legends and Valorant, which Tencent controls directly. Except Fortnite, but it's obvious that they have a big influence on its monetization tactics. Who do you think was behind the Travis Scott event and all those shenanigans? Tencent had done celebrity events for ages in honor of kings. They are League of Legends mobile clone. They put Messi in the game for God's sake. All 2 years prior to Fortnite's first major event and success. Speaking of honor of kings, Tencent, as well as China in general, are also big players on the esports scene. Who do you think holds the Guinness World Record for the biggest viewer attendance on a LAN tournament? Is it CS2, maybe Dota 2 or League of Legends? No, it's Honor of Kings, a mobile League of Legends copycat which had over 62,000 people in the stadium. They've also had 60 million people watching the grand finals from home. The prize pool for that tournament is $10 million. million bucks. I don't know if it's just me, but as a person who had never touched mobile gaming, to learn that one of those games is actually that big is just mind-blowing, let alone a Chinese one. Either way, despite China's general anti-gaming stance, they've put a lot of effort into making China an esports country. It might sound weird with all their restrictions, but in reality, the only difference is that the average age of a Chinese pro player is higher compared to the West. If something like CS2 has pro players that are 17 years old, China practically can't have that with its restrictions. But as soon as you reach 18 years old, you can freely pursue a professional career, and if you succeed, you will be taken quite seriously there. China was actually one of the first countries to consider this an actual sport back in 2003. It's also a great venture financially. Esports brings China around $4 billion each year, and that's excluding in-game purchases related to the events. It's the largest esports market by revenue on the entire planet. In other words, China has always been one of the most influential players of the gaming industry, but it's operating behind the scenes, at least the Western ones. Chances are you don't know much about China in general, what tech they use, what does their internet looks like, and so on. We are basically going in parallel, where nobody has much info about the other side, at least without thorough research. But without them, the industry would probably be looking quite different. Perhaps not as many free-to-play live service games at the very least. To me, the future of Chinese games looks promising. Now that they're venturing out into making AAA games for the global market, you can't really predict the scale at which they'll do it. If you think about it, who else can really make games that would rival GTA, for example? They have the cash, they have a unique skill set, and they have significantly lower labor costs. The Chinese industry is experiencing rapid growth and global success unseen before. Their only real enemy is their own government with all its regulations. It has been extremely unpredictable so far, but at this moment it seems like they are opening up a bit. That being allowing more stuff to be put in games, helping developers, and increasing the monthly quotas for games approved. The anti-addiction measures for the youth still remain the same though. You can surely expect high-quality Chinese games to emerge in the following years, and there will be a lot of them. Take a look at NetEase, the second biggest Chinese tech company after Tencent. They are slowly pulling their investments back from overseas. Instead, now they invest in Chinese developers to make highly competitive projects. Their games like Marvel Rivals or Once Human are the results of exactly this. The shift is happening already, and if you knew nothing about Chinese games before, trust me, you won't stop hearing about them now. And it's good. With higher competition, perhaps Western developers will also get up to speed and quality. It's been ages since the golden age of gaming. Maybe this is the push and change we need to make another one happen. At least that's what I hope for. Either way, a lot of interesting stuff is gonna happen, so let's see where it gets us.